And we're back. Welcome back, everyone. Craig and Jonah here today. How are you today, Jonah?
Doing pretty good. I'm standing in the presence of internet celebrity there. You've really mixed it up with some people lately.
Yeah.
And on Blue Sky, not just Twitter.
Yeah, that's actually the story I was going to lead with because so I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, and then yesterday I was um live streaming with Midnight about all this. It's kind of calmed down a little bit, but you know, some people are just so fixated on this stuff that I was telling him, I said, I can't even like go on someone's thread and say happy birthday without them throwing my tweet up there. And like, it doesn't taint you guys, people could be normal people and have, I don't know, unimproved opinions on some things. It doesn't taint everything they think and say, but they just bust it out every chance they get.
It's funny because it's like people were so surprised. They're like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
You know, what are his views?
People read a lot into it. Some of it fair, some of it
fair.
Most of it not. So then actually, yeah, so someone had commented on our last video here that a priest had picked up on it over on Blue Sky, which I was kind of aware of Blue Sky. I knew that there was, I don't know, was it during the last I don't know, campaign to hate Musk that people went over and said we need an alternative to Twitter. Is that what it was?
I think so.
I think Blue Sky was the Twitter alternative
for the liberal point of view.
I think that was sort of the genesis of that.
How do you like Blue Sky?
So far, I seems fine. I don't see that I'll be spending a lot of time over there just because I don't know. I mean, Twitter's a hot mess, but I don't know, that's where people are at. That's what I know, and so. But someone sent me a message. Oh yeah, a priest over at Blue Sky is more or less trashing me, which he was. So I said, I suppose I need to open up a Blue Sky account and go.
Was the handle still available?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No problems there. I don't know that I'll get a blue check verified over there, but I set it up and slid into the conversation. How's everyone doing?
Do they welcome you with open arms?
No.
It's not like the prodigal son returning.
No. They want to they enjoy making fun of me, condemning me, whatever, but they really are not interested in engaging with me, I have found.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that is unfortunate.
Yeah. Which I've come to expect. So I don't have a lot of expectations for people. But I like to think sometimes that priests ought to be a step above the rest of people when it comes to their capacity for discussion and debate. Turns out that isn't necessarily the case. Not with there's some out there, but there's definitely some that are like, no, I'm here for the engagement. I'm here to speak my opinions. I'm not here to hear from anyone else. Or I'm not.
No differing opinions, please.
Yeah, and that, for better or for worse, is sort of the name of the game for a lot of Catholics, and it's actually a really nice segue into today's topic, which is formation and following your conscience.
All right.
Speaking of, alternative views about things. So, before we do though, I mean, it's, I don't know. I grow less and less confident that these issues, these topics are really, going to get handled, I want to say, in a dialogued way out in the open. People are just so, I don't know if they're afraid, if they're angry, if they're, I don't even know what's going on. In pathologically, but people are just really, really incapable of having actual real conversations about these things.
And I don't think there's many people that can state it with the eloquence that you can.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. You are an excellent tweeter about issues like this.
God help us all.
You're the spokesperson.
Yeah. I'll keep doing it probably indefinitely unless Twitter smotes me or something like that. But I don't know. It's I got another message, I think yesterday. I think I forwarded it on to you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone was like very, very appreciative of what we do, which I tell you, that means a lot.
Should we talk about it a little bit? Because the guy was like talking about how he's considering joining the Catholic Church, but this is the biggest hang up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just great to hear us talk about these things in a not in a black and a white sort of way.
Yeah. And it's that this person is far from the only message like that we get. My experience, my sense is that a lot of people join the faith and then learn about some of these some more what's the right word, S- some of these more unusual rules after they become Catholic, and they're like, oh, they didn't mention that in our CIA. And but some people encounter them beforehand, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think we should be out in the open about it.
A point that he made that was pretty interesting was that he didn't think that he could join the faith, but then practice something else in his personal life
Mm.
that was contrary to the faith. As far as he didn't think he could do that, and that's that is difficult, to wrestle with. It's just because nobody's perfect in that aspect. I don't think.
Well,
Unless I think priests can be. I think possibly some marriages, but a very low percentage. I think, in my opinion, are capable of living that way without fail.
yeah, I mean, we certainly hear from people who are Catholic or have been Catholic for a while, been Catholic all their life, and they, say run into a situation where they find themselves in stark conflict between how their actual life lives, or how their actual life is, and what the church seems to teach about some of these things, and to the point where people wrestle with, well, what do I do in the confessional, because I'm to the point where I don't think there's anything wrong with this.
Hmm.
I feel like a little bit of a fraud going to confession to confess something I not really sorry for because I don't think I did anything wrong.
Hmm.
Do I not go to confession? Do I go to confession and confess it anyway? Do I confess it and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm confessing this because I feel like I'm supposed to," but uh, all kinds of things.
Or do you leave the church? Like those are the options.
Right. Yeah. Um,
Because if you look, like, did you want to talk about your poll the other day
Go ahead.
about the marriages? As far as like with NFP, whether or not,
Wh- whether they use other acts, stuff like
yep,
that.
stuff like that. Because I mean, when you look at the percentage of marriages, I was surprised at how many. I haven't seen the final numbers, but um, I was surprised at how many guys could answer no. That was impressive. But in
Mm,
both cases, both the men and women, a higher percentage answered that they had used other acts, essentially.
yeah. Let me see if I've got it. I can't.
Because
s-
that poll is closed by now, right?
Yeah, and I won't be able to put it up on the screen, but so the question in the poll came out because I was in a pretty heated debate with someone who actually I interviewed last week on my other channel, um, and he was very unconvinced, and I'm certain this guy is not married. I'm
He
quite
won't
certain.
answer my questions about it.
I'm quite certain he's not married, and I can't tell his age. He has a very high pitched voice, but
Oh, no kidding.
yeah, sounds like a very young man. But given how much he studied, I don't think he can be super young. But um, but I was telling him, I said he was contending that the people that use NFP and follow all of the church's teachings are going to have better marriages than those that deviate in some way. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's actually true, buddy. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, anecdotally, I get a lot of stories from people that suggest the contrary. He's like, well, show them. Well, I'm not going to post confidential messages from people on here like, well, and I don't believe you have them. I'm like, well, okay, so here, I'll run a poll. And so the poll was this: married Catholics using NFP, because I was trying to limit it to I was trying to exclude, first of all, couples that are using contraception. I was also trying to exclude couples that are let's say not using anything and they're just whatever happens
Mhm.
and or the
Or they're
marital
yeah.
debt people. Like I think those influence these results enough that I don't think
Mhm.
that's fair to lump them in. So it's designed to be the people that you know have to abstain on a regular basis.
Now I get it, 'cause in the comments to another guy had mentioned how well, he doesn't use NFP, but he still answered the poll, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, I don't know if NFP is," but now I get it.
I mean that was the goal there, is to ask these questions from the context of people that are regularly having to abstain for week, 10 days, 2 weeks at a
Or more.
time or more, regularly, because I think that's where this stuff
It's where the
comes up.
rubber meets the road.
That's right. So the question for married Catholics using NFP was this: have you masturbated or used quote?
I don't know why I laughed.
We're still pretty.
Yeah, we're still very juvenile around here.
I don't. Have you self-abused? I don't know.
Feel like I'm in the confessional right now.
I don't. That's right. And, let me check your palms, see if they're sweaty and twitching.
I thought you were checking to be hairy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. So, have you masturbated or used quote other acts unquote? And here I clarify. For example, oral sex without intercourse once or more in the last 365 days. That was the question. And now I wish we'd had more people respond to this. We had 57 votes. I haven't crunched the numbers, but and maybe we can do that. Maybe so we had if you need a notepad, you can write stuff down, but
I'm good.
we had 57 people vote and 54, so it was broken down. You could answer it yes as a man, no as a man, yes as a woman, no as a woman. Okay. And 54% of the total votes.
It's 31 people.
Okay. So 31 people were men. Yes, I have done one of those things or more in the last year. 37. 32% of respondents said man, no. And
And this 18 people.
that did surprise me a little bit.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. Unless I mean, you do say 365 days, but maybe people have a short memory. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
that's higher than I thought it would be, to be honest.
I was those don't seem representative of just the people that we talk to, but maybe we just hear more from the yes
Unless
crowd.
the marital debt people, maybe they consider
It's on-
themselves using NFP.
Yeah, I think that's it's on the honor system. So we may have had an influx of illegal voters in this one.
You gotta register to vote in this one.
Yeah, there was we weren't checking IDs and stuff for this, so take it for what it's worth. So the women, now 9% of respondents said women, yes, they've done that in the last year. How many is that?
Just a second. It must be around 4.
Maybe a little more than that, isn't it?
Oh, I messed up here.
As you can see, we don't do any of this
Yeah,
ahead
gosh,
of
why
time.
am I? Yeah, it'd be 5.
5 women answered yes, and then so how many?
Then
how
it'd
many
be like
women no?
must be 2.
5% said no.
Yep. No, I was 5. Oh, then 5% said no.
Yeah, 5% said no. Women.
3.
So,
The percentages are pretty similar there, I think, right?
so more than 50% of men. No, I want to say, how do I say this? What is it? Is it more than 75% of men?
Oh, yeah, you're right there. So, because it would be how many was it?
So 37 men said
37
yes,
plus
18 said no.
18.
15.
If you take 37 times 18, it equals 666, just in case you're wondering. I messed up there.
I would think you would say 37 divided by
Yep,
55.
that's 67%.
Okay. And then on the women, it's what's 5 divided by 8? God, we can't even do simple math on this.
62%.
Okay. So 67% of men who claim
They
that they're
identified as men, probably.
yeah identify as NFP using Catholics said yes to that in the last year, which honestly I would have. Well,
I mean,
I guess those don't surprise me that much, but maybe that's 60 substantial majority.
hmm
And then 62% of women said yes. I did expect the percentage of women to be less,
hmm
just because.
Yeah, women are different.
I mean, yes, probably in a better way.
It's yep. Keeps
So
them out of the confessional.
yeah, I mean, obviously, you would think that the other acts would be an equal distribution between them, but the solo tends to
hmm
skew more towards one gender over the other.
And if you haven't seen it, watch the Seinfeld episode about it because they
Yeah,
explain the differences between men and women there.
yeah,
It's pretty funny.
right, right. So, um, the vast majority now, whether these couples are remorseful about it, whether they're going to confession or
Ooh.
not, I think is, we don't necessarily have that data. But I think all of these people are probably well aware that doing these things is contrary to some church rule, catechism, whatever.
hmm
Um, or at least there's an argument for it, right? And so what do they do with that? Are they just doing it and then going to confession? Are they doing it without remorse? I'm following my conscience and my conscience says this is okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's all of that,
Probably all.
but I think the point, you know, traditionalists really like to, for those people that leave the church for, let's say, quote unquote, the social rules, the way that it's always framed, I think is in a pejorative way. They just want to go live a lustful life of debauchery, right? I mean, that's the way they're always, the Protestants just want to go live like,
Even though they're just having sex with their wife.
yeah. And I used to think that was true. Like, right. It's really easy to see the world that way until you realize it's not so cut
How
and
many
dry.
kids in did you start questioning that?
Quite a few. I'm a slow learner.
But then I thought it was funny too because somebody in the comments said this poll is despicable.
Mm.
I mean, how is that not interesting?
Just yeah.
I mean, I know that you're probably uncomfortable by the results, but it's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is a super interesting poll because I think it gets at the heart of the issue. Midnight and I were talking about this yesterday because I think the more and more I've come to conclude that NFP isn't actually the main problem. I mean, it's a difficulty, but it's that combined with the idea that you must be completely sexually impotent, I guess. I don't know. Just
Yeah, sterile.
yeah. That makes it really difficult. It's difficult to go without the conjugal act for extended periods of time, weeks at a time, but it's mercilessly difficult to go without anything at all.
hmm
And I think that's where most couples struggle with, and then they find themselves, can I be cat can I so some just say, well, what's the point? We'll just go use birth control,
Mhm.
which a lot of
Which
Catholics have taken that approach. I mean, the majority of Catholics do use birth control.
mhm. If
Um,
they had the option, though, like a moral option of just being able to be together other ways,
yeah,
I suspect it would be lower if that was taught.
yeah,
Whereas if they're gonna break the rules, might as well just go all the way. Make it easier.
yeah. Because I mean, I suspect that um, being able to do it the way you want and use birth control is a lot more fun and enjoyable than these other things. It's not like these are like substitutes for
And
it.
they're more risky because sometimes things get out of hand. I
That's
mean,
right. Right. So I don't know. I mean, I when I first started realizing that people do this, I assumed that no one did it. Like I assume we were all just trying to grit our. No, I mean, I assume nobody was doing it knowingly and purposely. I was pretty confident that most men were slipping up
mhm.
unintentionally or not wanting to.
The confessional line data supports that.
Yeah. But, other acts, you know, is, I don't know, a little more of a volitional decision. And maybe most of these people, maybe most of these are just solo artists. I don't know. I mean, I don't distinguish, right? I
Yep.
mean, so maybe very few of them are doing stuff together, but at least some of them are.
Yeah, I mean, when we get scared of asking questions like this,
Mhm.
we're just not. It feels like less of a religion,
Yeah.
like less of a faith and
Yeah.
trusting in God, really.
Right. And so when I kind of brought this stuff up recently on Twitter and stuff, because what got me in trouble is I said if the Pope really wanted to help Catholic marriages, he would, if he can, again, if theologically possible, look into these things. Um, and of course, a lot of traditionalists think that's preposterous and stuff, and it can't happen. It shouldn't happen. If the Pope did that, I think they'd be looking for a new church themselves, probably. Which,
Which is interesting.
yeah, it's an interesting battle line there to red line, but whatever.
Whatever.
Um,
You do you, buddy.
yeah, but I got quite a bit of other pushback from people who say, just you're going about this wrong. Leave the Pope out of this. And and some of them are like, first of all, the Pope isn't going to change anything, but second of all, the reason why we have these problems is because the popes and the bishops weigh in too much on the bedroom activities. And I don't know, people can have their opinions about whether that's right or not, but
It's an interesting issue though, because if you ask the poll, like if you asked a poll, how many of you have stolen in the past 365 days, or how
yeah,
many times have you killed somebody in the last 300?
yeah, right,
It'd be like zeros.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas this is a much more
hmm,
domestic issue.
yeah, yeah, I for sure. I mean, it's very much more part of who we are as people. So now, judging from the reactions, maybe including or especially among the priest, I've any small amount of optimism. I thought that there could be a rule update is pretty much gone. I there's just no way. What there's no pope
It's
is
gonna
going to
take
take
on
on
this.
this issue. Gosh, all Friday. Um. So what happens? So what happens in reality is I think it gets handled on an individual marital level, and couples decide for themselves, are we going to do this? And if we're going to do this, are we going to feel morally guilty about it? And are we going to go to confession? And different priests are going to handle it differently.
Hmm.
Um, some priests will read between the lines and say, well, you're really not sorry about it, so I'm not going to give you absolution.
Hmm.
Others will be like, I understand why it happens. Stop worrying about it.
Hmm.
And a whole bunch of somewhere in between.
Variations in between. Yeah.
Right. And that's really where these issues I think ultimately get handled, is on the individual level, which, I mean, I see the merits of that to some extent, but the part that bothers me is I know there are plenty of good couples out there that will not venture into something um, that they think violates church teaching, no matter
Hmm.
how.
And good for them.
Yeah, and I'm not here to say they're wrong,
No, not at all.
but I believe there are plenty of good Catholics out there that um, would entertain some of these things, would find benefit in their marriage if they felt like they had the moral freedom to do so,
Hmm.
but feel like they don't have the moral freedom to do so and don't think about it, and so they suffer a lot, for better or for worse. They
There
endure a
is
lot of
merit in suffering too.
yeah,
We're not saying that doesn't
right.
exist, but
So that's the part that bothers me is I don't think
there's also merit in having a good marriage too.
you would like to think
I
so,
would
right?
like to think so. Yes.
Yeah. So that is why I think we continue to talk about these things, is because for a lot of couples, and I would say, you know, I would put myself firmly in that camp that it was not even something even thought about for the first 15, 20 years of marriage.
Hmm.
Now I'm at least intellectually open to the idea of it. Doesn't Now what you do with that is you know one thing, but just to even be open to the idea.
What do you think opened your mind to that? Was it just continual sort of just low grade suffering? Or I mean, sometimes it's higher grade suffering, to be honest.
um I think it was just a breaking point of the suffering after so many years, and just like this is really destructive.
That's that's how I felt too. At a certain point, it was just like, how is this supposed to be what marriage
Yeah.
is? How it's supposed to be lived
Well,
out?
you keep thinking, well, this is a season, like suffering is a season, right? Which means that eventually it's not going to be this way. And then you start to be like, is like, this is the norm. This is what I have to look forward to for the rest of my life.
Marriage is the season.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's when I realized that, wait a second, there may not be an end to this.
You know, that is so true. Yeah.
So I think for me, that was the f- the switch that sort of flipped in my brain. Is like, hold on a second, this I don't know that I can do this for the rest of my life. Now,
You get weekly confession benefits out of it.
yeah, I guess.
Maybe not a guy like yourself, but you did a better job than most, I think.
Well, I probably could have frequented the confession more than I did when I was, but I don't know. It's hard to go every week as a busy person for the same reason over and over and over again.
I don't know. I, Dolores and I just went to confession the other day, and I told her, I said, this guy has heard my confession. I'm in the range of more than 500 times. So we had a good laugh about it.
Yeah,
The poor guy.
you you just don't listen to me, do you, buddy? You don't.
I mean, and he gives good advice, you know, and I don't know. I don't feel like getting too deep down the rabbit hole with him in the confession line because it's usually a line behind me. So,
Yeah, it's not. It's really hard, I think, in the confessional to really unpack this stuff very much. And um, I've never had a priest go to the point where I'm not really going to absolve you or whatever like that. And so
no.
you go in there, you take your lumps, and you go back out. And
Just like marriage.
yep. Just give me my penance, and I'll
Yep.
see you next week or whatever. But
A group absolution for all the men might be just
yeah,
fine.
that might
I mean,
be
that'd save time, and you could go every week then more easily.
exactly.
The
Yeah.
fast pass or
Yeah.
group
Yeah.
absolution, either way.
Yep, it's like the pre-screen TSA line or whatever like that.
You could go to the front, buddy.
We have a special aisle just for all you NFP Catholic men over here. There's only one reason you're here,
Yeah,
so
pretty much.
But I think for again, I I don't know what the answer is, but at least opening the idea that maybe it doesn't have to be that way was liberating, but also anger inducing, because it seems to me that the church, um, either purposely or unintentionally, kind of hides this idea from people that they may actually be not only allowed but required to ultimately decide for themselves what they need to do. And so today I want to talk a little bit about conscience. Okay. Um, and I grew up thinking that conscience was just figuring out what the church says and then applying that to your life. And conscience was more or less, have you followed the rules or not?
Mhm.
Right. And and I thought that conscience, in terms of following your conscience, would be limited to, let's say, ignoring secular rules if they violate your moral values, right? So if the civil rules required you to do something that you thought was immoral, then following your conscience meant you disregarded the civil rule
Mhm.
in favor of the moral rule. Like that was sort of how I thought it was. Turns out it may not just be that. It may. So what do you do when your strongly held beliefs um are at odds with or conflict with church teaching? And I think that's a much different issue, that something that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with. But as I understand it, the church says at the end of the day, you have to follow your conscience, even if it conflicts with church teaching. Now, I hope I that's the,
Which is also an unpopular opinion online.
oh yeah, I hope that doesn't make me a heretic. I'm just telling you what I believe is an accurate.
And that was Thomas Aquinas, right?
Well, different ones. I think probably the most notable one was Ratzinger said something to that effect. I think was it the end of Vatican II?
Conservative Ratzinger.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's always sort of a fun factoid for people. Like, who said this?
All
And
right.
they're thinking, oh, it's some liberal soupage type or something like that. Nope, it was Ratzinger. So, I thought, so if you got a few, let's talk a little bit about conscience. And so I asked the best source for information on Catholic morality, ChatGPT.
All right.
So we're going to bring out ChatGPT, and we'll go through this a little bit. So I'm going to. All right. So here's what I asked ChatGPT. I says, please provide a detailed overview of the Catholic Church's teaching on forming and following one's conscience. Please specifically analyze it from the perspective of whether a faithful Catholic's conscience can be contrary to other church teaching.
Okay.
Again, this is, don't take moral advice from us. Don't take moral advice from
Chat-
ChatGPT. But I think what you're going to see here is pretty much accurate. So ChatGPT says, the Catholic Church's teaching on forming and following one's conscience is a rich and nuanced area of moral theology. It upholds conscience as a sacred faculty through which each person is called to discern moral truth and act accordingly. Yet it also emphasizes the obligation to properly form one's conscience, which is what you typically hear
hmm
from trads, in accord with objective moral truth and church teaching. Here's a detailed overview and analysis of whether faithful Catholic's conscience can rightly contradict church teaching. So, number one, the nature of conscience in Catholic teaching. Here's a definition. So, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, section 1778. I did not fact check these, so you may have to do that. But it says, conscience is a judgment of reason whereby the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act that he is going to perform, is in the process of performing, or is already completed. So it's the judgment of reason whereby someone recognizes the moral quality of an act.
Okay. Seems fair.
Yeah.
It's a fine definition.
Yeah, it says it is the interior voice that moves a person to do good and avoid evil. Which,
Yep.
that seems right. But here, so here's the really interesting thing, and this is something I really didn't think about as a Catholic for a long, long time. Is number two, conscience as a moral obligation. And again, not, I always thought of it as a moral obligation if you're dealing with secular laws that you had to reject, not necessarily church
Church
laws,
laws.
right? It says the church teaches that a person must follow their conscience. So this is from Catechism 1782, says man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. He must not be forced to act contrary to his conscience, nor must he be prevented from acting according to his conscience, especially in religious matters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite the little clause there.
Yeah. 1782. I'll double check these after the fact to make sure I've got them right. If I have to, I'll put in a little edit there. So section 1790 says, quote, a human being must always obey the certain judgment of his conscience, unquote. So it says, thus, if one's conscience tells them a particular act is morally obligatory or prohibited, they must follow that judgment, even if it is mistaken or they sin. That's pretty weighty.
Wow.
You have to follow it.
Wonder who wrote that. So we were interested in who wrote 2356, but
I
that's an interesting statement.
This sounds a lot like the I think it's at the end of the Second Vatican Council that Ratzinger wrote. I believe that's the source or something around that time frame. So here's the kicker, okay? They're always say, well, if your conscience tells you to do something the church says not to, that just means your conscience isn't well formed. And that could very well be the case.
Sure.
But I think the problem is that for a lot of people, talking about the people in the scenario we were talking about before, it's not that they lack an understanding of what the church says. It's not a lack of understanding of that. It's I don't the reality of the life that you're dealing with, and you can't inform yourself anymore about the suffering that you're enduring, trying to navigate the abstaining and all that kind of stuff.
Like, do our experiences help form our conscience?
Yeah,
don't see how they don't.
I would think so. I don't know. I don't know how that information fits in, because this is stuff that isn't just from a moral textbook. This is like the lived, real experience of being married, and this is the part that someone who's celibate and not been married simply can't really.
Oh yeah, I mean, unless you've been married,
yeah, you're never going to
really
have that
understand
experience,
marriage.
right?
Yeah.
You're never going to have that experience or the information that comes from that experience. So section 2, formation of conscience. It says conscience must be formed. However, conscience is not infallible, and a person can make erroneous judgments. The church insists on the duty to form one's conscience properly. And so section 1783 of the Catechism says conscience must be informed and moral judgment enlightened. A well-formed conscience is upright and truthful. Okay. So means of formation. Conscience is formed through first, scripture and church teaching, and it says in parentheses, especially the Catechism and Magisterium. So that's number one, scripture and church teaching. Number 2, prayer and reflection.
Okay.
Number 3, guidance from spiritual mentors.
Okay.
And number 4, an honest search for truth.
Okay.
And I don't know if these are of equal weight. Are these and maybe in the Catechism it talks about that a little more, but I think you ask most traditional Catholics or conservative Catholics, they'll say scripture and church teaching gets heavy deference, and these other things can maybe factor in, but in no way should carry equal weight. And that could be right. I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm not an expert on these matters, but I think those are the kind of the factors that you have to factor in. So section 3, erroneous conscience and moral responsibility. So there's 2 types of errors. So the church recognizes 2 kinds of erroneous conscience. One is invincible ignorance.
Okay.
When one is not culpable for their error, perhaps due to a lack of access to the truth or poor catechesis. And vincible ignorance, when one neglects their duty to form their conscience and is therefore morally responsible for the error. And that's, I think, always the hard thing, because it's really hard to be. how do you self-evaluate
Mhm.
if I properly form my conscience, right?
It doesn't seem possible,
It
right?
it I don't yeah, it really isn't. So, I think that's a concept that is fine in theory, but in practice, I think for most of us, it's really, really difficult to know if we are doing our job.
And people's consciences are probably perfected over time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when do you decide, well, my conscience is good?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll get to this. And I think one thing I will say is um it's not like it's a singular event. It's meant to be an ongoing process. Always updating and testing your conscience with new and better information,
Hmm.
whether it's scripture.
Or Twitter.
Twitter wasn't listed in there, but I don't know which category that would fall under.
I don't know. Maybe you stung them like a bee, and they're going to reflect on that as they heal.
Yes, that's right. Spiritual mentors doesn't say what mentors are. I'll put that in my bio.
Yeah,
Spiritual
spiritual
mentor.
mentor.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of weight that goes with that.
So if a conscience is invincibly erroneous, the person is not morally guilty for following it. If the error is due to negligence, the person may be morally culpable. So, I mean, this is where what the church gives, the church kind of taketh away, because again, I think I think most people, myself included, for many years would have said, well, if your conscience is in conflict with church teaching, then almost by definition you have a poorly formed conscience, and you have vincible ignorance, because
Hmm.
the church teaching is black and white. I mean, I think they would just say everyone that does something contrary to church teaching has vincible ignorance, because you can't claim to be ignorant of what the church teaches. But I don't think that's actually I don't think that's actually how you measure that, right? I don't think. I mean,
Hmm.
I could be wrong. I could be invincibly ignorant about this. But I don't think it's enough to say you're vincibly ignorant if there's a black and if the catechism says you're wrong, because that's not actually how your conscience is formed. It's something you have to factor in. It's one of the things, but it's not the it's not supposed to substitute for your conscience. Your
Hmm.
conscience still has to form its own conclusion. So section 4, conscience versus church teaching. So the question is, can a faithful Catholic's conscience be contrary to church teaching? And as ChatGPT acknowledges, here is the core tension. The church affirms both the primacy of conscience and the authority of church teaching. So what happens if they seem in conflict? In principle, yes, a person may find their conscience in conflict with church teaching on a particular matter. However, such a conflict should be seen as a sign that their conscience is not fully or properly formed.
Oh,
That's one way of looking at it. The church does not teach that one's conscience is autonomous from truth. Rather, and here is quoting from Veritatis Splendor, section or paragraph 60, conscience does not establish the law, it bears witness to the authority of the natural law.
okay.
And then
So
paragraph,
Chat GPT calls you a heretic too.
apparently, I think it saves me in the end here. Keep scrolling.
Uh,
Paragraph 52 of Veritatis Splendor says it is never acceptable to choose against what is morally right. So it says, thus, if one's conscience conflicts with definitive church teaching, the church sees this as an error to be corrected, not a valid alternative path.
okay.
I don't know if that's actually accurate or not, but I think that's the way it's typically presented.
That's the gist of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. What
So,
you'll see on Twitter.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, what should a faithful Catholic do? They should obey their conscience in the short term, because to do otherwise is a sin, but simultaneously commit a deeper formation, study, and dialogue to resolve the conflict, remain open to being corrected by the Church's magisterium. As the Second Vatican Council put it, in the formation of their consciences, the Christian faithful ought to carefully to attend to sacred and certain doctrines of the Church. That's from Dignitatis Humanae, section or paragraph 14. Now, it goes on to, not surprisingly, says, here's some contemporary examples of Catholics who find their conscience in conflict with church teaching on issues such as artificial contraception, same-sex relationships, divorce and remarriage.
Okay. Other acts aren't in there? You
No.
haven't made the radar yet, I
Yeah,
bet you.
right. Yeah.
For the AI
Not
language
enough
models yet.
people coming out and saying that um, the church's position on these teachings are part of the objective moral law, and a conflict indicates a conscience not yet fully formed. And then it goes on to what Pope Francis thought about conscience. And so it says Pope Francis has highlighted the role of conscience in Amoris Laetitia, which I have not read, especially regarding pastoral care. It says, quote, "We are called to form consciences, not replace them."
Hmm.
Section 37, paragraph 37, which ChatGPT says this has prompted debate. Some interpret his pastoral tone as opening the door for more personal discernment, even in tension with church norms. But the magisterial position remains: conscience must always seek truth, and truth is not subjective. And so I think that is the crux of the issue there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is when you're, truth is objective. Truth can't, it is what it is. And I think there's plenty would say it's simply not possible for you to have a well-formed conscience that calls you to do or not do something that the church has definitively said this is moral truth. And I totally I get that,
Mm-hmm.
which I think then leads some people to the point, well, I guess I'm not allowed to be a Catholic
Mm-hmm.
and hold these views or do these things that are definitively not allowed. So what do I do in that case? Do I live in tension? Do I avoid confession? Do I bring it up in confession? Do I find another church? Those are the options that present, you know, real people.
Mm-hmm. And personally, I love the Catholic faith, and I just tend to go to confession and trust in God's mercy and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, going to a different church for me would not be a viable option. It just
Yeah.
whenever I've been to a different type of service, it just doesn't feel quite right, and I don't understand that either, I guess.
And one thing I don't like is how there seems to be this impulse especially among trads, because I see this, I hear this all the time. You say something that is in any way slightly out of bounds, they're like, just go become a Protestant, you heretic. I'm like, well, is that my alternative? Those are my choices.
Is that what they want?
Yeah, I mean, why are we?
Pushing people away.
Yeah, we're constantly opening up the exit door for people to leave, rather than like at least understanding that people don't just flippantly come up with these things.
Hmm.
Um, especially if these comments come from a single person or whatever, like you just don't know.
And I mean, we have the Eucharist, we have confession, we have so many
Yeah,
great aspects to our faith, and you have the history and tradition and the
yeah,
saints and all that. I mean,
yeah,
it's beautiful,
yeah,
and I couldn't leave that.
yeah. I think I like to think that the church's concept of truth is supposed to be a strength, and it's supposed to be a wall of protection. But I think too many view it as as a wall of exclusion. Like,
Hmm.
get outside the walls.
Hmm. You don't belong here.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate. I don't think it's
I,
supposed to be that way.
I just don't feel like Jesus was like that.
Right,
Maybe I'm misreading the
right,
Gospels, but
right. So you could have someone who has, not to get too far into other subjects, but yesterday I was listening to an interview by, I don't know if it's John Rock. I think his last name was Rock, but the guy that invented the hormonal birth control pill. Um, turns out he was a devout Catholic, went to daily mass. So
mm,
he founded the birth control pill and fought vigorously. I think I think he may have been involved in the um, papal commission on before Humani Vitae came out, and he got the same thing. Well, like this obviously you can't do this as a Catholic. Get out, go find. He's like, I'm a Catholic. Like, this is my faith. Like,
mhm.
I'm not. I don't want to leave. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that position, and or like we were talking about earlier, people that want to become Catholic but want to be authentically Catholic and don't want to come in already having things that they simply cannot or don't think that they could ever accept about church teaching.
Do you think you went to confession for developing hormonal contraception? Like, that would be a massive moral weight. I think if I had been the person to do that, I don't know. I'm sure I would have confessed it at one time or another.
I'm sure he took it up in spiritual direction, but one of the things that one of the overarching themes of his biography and stuff is he talks about how I think it was a priest told him at a very early age, no matter what else happens, make sure you follow your conscience and don't let anyone take that away from you, including the church.
Wow.
And that was in the early 1900s, I think.
Wow.
And so, it is, very timely that, we're talking about conscience, and that was his moral issue. And that's what he brought up is like, I'm going to follow my conscience and no one's going to take that away from me for better or for worse. And for a long time, I thought that was just nonsense. You couldn't do that as a Catholic. Now I understand how people can find themselves in that position. And I think I hope as a church, we can find a way to talk through these things and listen to people without just using that as the opportunity to show them the exit and throw them
A-
out. And
And there's a lot more things than other acts. You do have birth control, but you also have people that are divorced and remarried, and
Mhm.
what their previous marriages were like could be terrible, but then
Mhm.
they're living in sin essentially. I don't know how you reconcile that.
I don't either. I think there's a lot of messy stuff um, that it's a tough thing because the church, understandably, is very reluctant to open the door even a little bit,
Hmm.
because people will probably rush through, I guess. And we've seen sort of how it's played out in the Protestant churches and, started with Anglicanism. Now it's a free for all, which I don't think that's a good thing.
And
But
maybe it should be more of an individualized care situation where you do go to your pastor or a priest and just work through these issues.
and that very well might be the case. And that's sort of what I'm coming around to is wanting or expecting the Pope or some high level response to this number one, not really be possible, but maybe that isn't the best course. Maybe that isn't actually what is the best
There's,
way of dealing with this problem.
it doesn't feel like there's a one size fits all ruling for this sort of thing because
Yeah,
everybody's at a different state in their marriage and
yeah,
life, and
yeah,
it takes a lot of thought to determine what somebody's correct course of action should be, probably.
yeah. Well, uh, I was thinking about this as you were talking about, like in the short term, follow your conscience, but I'm like, well, I will say the older you get, the less difficult some of this stuff gets. So maybe that's the answer for
You
Catholics is
can
just
age out right before you die. And hopefully, you're in a good spot.
yeah, I'm hoping it becomes a manageable problem in the next decade or shorter 5 years or whatever. But um, it's not that it's not a problem now, but
And your
it's
plan is just that during menopause, you can just have all the intimacy you want.
yeah, that's what all the brochures said.
You'll just, you'll just be filled up
Yeah.
with just
Yep.
so much intimacy.
Yeah. That oasis that I see ahead of me in the desert is I'm just about
You're
there.
just about there.
Just about there. And I'll tell you how wonderful it is when
Yeah.
I get there. So, yeah. Anyway, so I think that's enough heresy for one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think personal conscience is something that really needs to be talked about more
Hmm.
because I don't think it's fairly treated in the either in most sermons, certainly not in the Twitter sphere. I don't think I don't think the responses you get out there from especially from lay people are necessarily accurate. Not that we're necessarily accurate either, but I think we're presenting something that more closely resembles what the church actually says about these things than other sources.
And I don't believe that I was ever taught anything about the primacy of conscience
Right.
in
Right.
Catholic school.
Right. And I think I hear more and more people say this needs to be talked about more. So maybe we'll be doing a little more about it. It'd be nice to get some moral experts, if there is such a thing, that can come on and flesh this out a little bit for us.
And the Catholic Church is supposed to be the universal church. Like,
Yeah.
it's not supposed to be an exclusionary church.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And people come from all different ways of life
Yeah.
and living in societies, and we're all supposed to
Yeah.
come together through this faith.
Yeah. I always like, someone says it's like a field hospital or something like that. And I've really liked that analogy and stuff. And I think people need to just be reminded
It's
of
true.
that.
You can't treat people the same in a field hospital.
Yeah. So if we do nothing else, I'd like people to think about it that way a little bit more, because it doesn't seem to be the tone that comes out when people are talking about these things, at least online.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can change that a little bit.
Definitely.
So
one Twitter post at a time.
One Twitter post at a time. Exactly. It's not much, but it's honest work. So, as they say.
Yep, that's for sure, man.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jonah. Thank you, everyone, for listening and commenting. And for sure, if you find any inaccuracies in what ChatGPT we said, leave it in the comment, and we'll certainly do our best to correct that, because we don't want to be misstating anything. So,
yep.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jonah. Until next time, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one.